village of Nether Poppleton, just outside York. As you can see, most of the houses are modern, some are Victorian, a few are 18th or at a push 17th century. But from up here, it looks very different. Even I can recognise a traditional medieval village layout, with the main street running up to the church and lots of little plots running off it. And those earthworks to the side of the church are an officially registered medieval site. But the locals think it's older. They think they can trace the roots of their village back to the Normans or even the Saxons. Are they right? We've got just 3 days to find out.
Good morning, everybody. It's really good of you to take part in this. I hope you're going to enjoy it. And I thought I just ought to say a little bit to you about what we're going to do, because it's not really a respectable research strategy to bulldoze your village from end to end, flatten it all out, and then look underneath it. You have to adopt a different strategy.
It's 9 o'clock day one, and the people of Poppleton have assembled to find out how they can help us pin down the true age of their village. They're going to do the work today by digging test pits in their own gardens, with some help from us. So what are we after?
We're after the origins of the village. Does it start as a Saxon village? Is it laid out in the Norman period? Does it come into existence in the Middle Ages?
How do we get that?
Dig lots and lots of pits all over the village, 1 metre test pits, and just get what the finds are from that to indicate what activity there's been on that site.
Hang on, you're persuading these people just to look for finds?
Yeah.
Isn't that the exact opposite of everything that you've told me that archaeology is? Archaeology is about features, archaeology is about stratigraphy, it's about knowledge, not about ripping finds out of the ground.
No, you're absolutely right. You obviously have learned something in the last 12 years.
Well, you haven't.
No, but it's the same idea. It's looking for broken bits of pot that are indications of activity where people have lived and broken stuff in that particular area. So if we start to get 12th century pottery or Saxon pottery or medieval pottery, it'll tell us as activity to that date. If we plot it all across the village, then we'll start to see the concentrations, and those will be the areas we need to dig in to get the structures.
Should we get them started?
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, how many of you know what you're supposed to do next? About a third of them. Well done, Vic. We want you all to get back to your homes with your pet archaeologist in your hand and start digging, all right? Off you go! As they all set off, there's a great sense of community spirit about. Many people are digging in their own gardens, or they'll help out their less able neighbours. They'll bring all their finds to the incident room. We'll analyse and date them, and when we've identified the oldest, we'll decide where to put trenches in tomorrow. So it looks like there's going to be competition among the locals. Where will the oldest part of the village be? We've divided the village into 5 sections, each one with its own archaeologist, to make sure that things are done properly.
I think you'll be surprised what you find in just the soil of a garden. I live in a 1960s bungalow, so you'd think there'd be absolutely nothing at all in it. And I've got 1 piece of Roman pottery, about 12 pieces of 12th century pottery, and then everything from 12th century to modern. And that's in a 1960s bungalow garden.
Across the village, test pits are opening all over the place, and everyone's doing their part. We do our best to help out.
Even with that, what you want to do is try and keep things level. So go along like that, rather than digging down. You know, you want to know which finds came from the top of your test pit and which at the bottom.
When you dig a trench, if it's a metre at the top, it must be a metre at the bottom. In other words, the sides of the trench must always be absolutely vertical. This means that the layer that you've got exposed actually on the bottom of the trench, you can actually see it in section. So don't just dig in the middle of the hole, dig right up to the edges, keep them straight. There's Phil's gospel lesson for the day.
By mid-morning, we're well on our way to exploring this side of the village where the main street and houses are. But over here to the east lies the church. It was built in Norman times, so it's possible there was something else there at that time. Geophysics are having an early look around it. And Stuart's already out and about, doing a full landscape survey of the whole area.
The church is usually a central feature of the community, so if we're going to understand how people have lived here, we need to look at the church.
Is that one Norman?
I think Norman in its present form, but there must be earlier and later stuff as well.
Do you know much about the actual history of this site, Sarah?
Well, the church is dedicated to St Everilda, who's a very unusual dedication. There are only 2 churches dedicated to her in Yorkshire. She was a 7th century saint. We think that Bishop Wilfrid, who was Bishop of York, encouraged her to settle in Yorkshire with 2 other nuns in the 670s, and around them a community, it said, of up to 80 nuns soon formed.
So there could actually be a nunnery on this site?
I think so, and the church could be merely one part of a whole series of buildings going off in this direction.
With evidence of them still under the ground
Just
somewhere?
under the surface, yeah.
John, what's the geophys like?
Well, we've had some results back already, and it's looking quite interesting, and points to the possibilities of, you know, other churches being here.
Does that look as building-y to you as it does to me?
It probably is. I mean, that's one of the things that would get us excited about the idea of a line of churches, yeah.
So can we put a trench in there?
Well, we need to do a lot more geophysics first to see a lot more of the area around before we go for that.
So although this church dates from the 11th century, St Everilda lived here 400 years earlier. There may well have been buildings from that time on this site. Could we find a Saxon settlement somewhere around this church? Back in the village, people are beginning to get the hang of things.
Nope, nothing in that one.
And some finds are coming up.
You see a tad, a bit of green glaze over there.
Oh, yeah.
It's almost as old as I am.
Another stone into it.
I think you've got a Roman brick.
You've got a good imagination.
Very vivid, yes. Very vivid. The early signs, at least in this trench, look good.
That's what I'd call proper medieval. You're like 13th, 14th century. Jug sherds, it's local stuff probably made somewhere around York. These haven't travelled far at all, so, I mean, I think you could well be on top of some medieval archaeology here.
But you never believe, would you, that...
No, I'd have never believed this was here at all.
So it's within religious hands.
In the incident room, Carenza and Sarah are having a look at the written history of Poppleton, and there isn't that much to go on.
The Domesday Book, and the Domesday Book tells us quite a bit more. We've got the extract here, and it tells us, in another, that is Nether Poppleton, Odie the deacon had 2.5 caracots taxable. That's 2.5 caracots of land. It's about 300 acres. This land was of St Everilda's, that's the church.
So what date does Poppleton first appear in the written record?
Well, the first reference is in 972, when Oswald, the Archbishop of York, listed a large number of lands in Yorkshire that he said the church had lost during the wars earlier in the century. And among that list, he included just 2 hides, that's about 240 acres, in Poppleton. And that's all the record tells us.
What about the place name itself? That must predate 972.
Well, the place name has Saxon elements in it. Tun meaning a settlement and Popple meaning the pebbly place, so the settlement on the pebbly soil, the settlement on the pebbly, perhaps banks of the river. So it has a Saxon element, and that could indeed be, in one sense, the oldest reference that we have to there being something here.
Phil's now moved up to work on the church, but he isn't where I expected him to be. Well, this morning we thought we were going to put a trench in here.
Yeah, but the more geophysics we did across this whole area, that corner of the building that looked so definite just disappeared. It just didn't seem as significant.
So there's no building there?
So we decided not to tackle that. It really doesn't look like a building, so we came back over here.
And put one down here. Why is that?
Well, because there is a suggestion that this wall went on this way, and we've got permission to dig 4 square metres, so we thought we'd wrap it round the corner.
Oh, whoa. If you think the wall went that way,
yeah,
why are you digging a trench out there?
We started with those 2 square metres, and then we can do the other 2 square metres round this way.
I see you've got a pipe there, Phil. Anything else?
Yeah, you see here, Tony, got a little child burial.
Oh.
Just one of those things, really. I mean, you know it's a burial ground.
What are you going to do with it?
I'm going to give it the due respect it deserves and just leave it alone. Funnily enough, it doesn't actually detract from the objectives of the trench here.
Which is?
Well, you see, if I get my shovel, see if I slot it in there.
Yeah.
Now, that is the base of the foundations. So the whole church is sitting on big stones like this. The main thing is that there is nothing, no walls coming this way. So in fact, we know that there was it doesn't look as though there are any aisles or transepts coming this way off of that wall.
Because we thought there might. You see that curve there, Tony?
Yeah.
Looks if there's an opening in there, and we thought that something might come off here. Well,
so you think it might just be a door?
I think it might be more like a sort of tomb set in the wall or an Easter sepulchre or something. Clearly it's not a structure coming out this way, so it's answered that.
So now you've answered that, do you have to continue with this trench, or can you...
No, because we know that it was not wider. What we've now got to prove is whether or not it was longer.
So that's this
So
way.
that's when you wrap it around here?
Wrap it around the corner.
So we'll have this same conversation in a few hours' time.
That little child burial, you know, is typical of what you find all over the place. It's probably an infant, you know, that died at childbirth or something like that, and the parents have just popped it in the churchyard, probably one night, to save, you know, paying the burial fee, but to make sure the child's in consecrated ground.
Across the village, even more test pits are opening up. There are now 32 of them. 3 o'clock day 1, and this whole area is checkered with test pits. There's one down there by that yellow bucket, then 2 gardens along, there's one over there, then another 3 gardens along by that guy in the red hat, there's one, and then way at the end of that same garden by that blue tarpaulin is another one. And what have we found so far? Absolutely nothing. Strictly speaking, people have found some things, but we're not seeing them in the incident room. They're not getting to us fast enough, so we can't analyse them. Paul and Carenza aren't exactly rushed off their feet, and they're a bit worried.
Carenza, to Ian, Raksha, Matt, Bridget and Kerry, have any of you got any more finds to come in from any test pits? Because we really need it up here as quickly as possible.
I've got someone coming in from 15 Hillcroft Avenue.
Anybody else?
Chasing finds by radio isn't working, so when all else fails, there's only one way to get things moving.
Right, how are we doing here? We need to move on with all this. How are you getting on?
About 500 mil down now. We're coming to a close, we think.
Right, OK. Can you get the finds to the incident room as soon as possible? Because we need to get Paul to sort them tonight.
No problem.
Yeah? OK, brilliant, thanks. Right, how are you doing? Are you nearly finished?
Yes.
Can you get those finds down to the incident room now?
Yeah, certainly.
To get them dated tonight.
Right.
OK, brilliant, thanks.
Right.
Well, this worked. Now Paul and Carenza are complaining they've got too much to do.
You could just put them down there somewhere.
It's the end of day 1. All the test pits are finally closed. The people who dug them have found loads of stuff. Look, this is just some of the rubbish. But of course, they all want to know what it means. Can we tell them, Mick?
I think so. We're still in the business of analysing the results here and plotting on the map, but we do have late Saxon pottery coming out now.
That's what we were looking for, isn't it?
Yep.
Is this just the only piece of Saxon, Paul, or have you got more?
No, we've got 5 pieces of late Saxon. One's literally, you were talking, has just appeared.
And how much more have you got to sort through?
I've no idea. There's masses of stuff coming in. They're watching it, sorting it as best they can over here, then getting it through to me, and I'm ploughing through it.
How long is it going to take you?
I don't know.
Well, you know, I'm just acutely aware that we've got a load of people coming in at 9 o'clock.
Sure, but the longer you stand
morning.
there talking, the longer it's going to
take.
take.
Yeah, I'm not having a pop, it's just that there's a lot of people going to come in.
Yeah, well, I realise that. I'm getting through it as fast as I can.
Carenza, are we going to be able to tell people where they can put in their trenches tonight?
Well, if we're looking for Saxon, at the moment the concentration seems to be right at the other end of the village in Ian's area, but we've got to go through the finds from all the test pits before we make a decision, because some of the other ones may have equally good concentration of Saxon material. We can't start until we know that.
So tomorrow, bright and early, loads of people from the village are going to turn up asking what this little lot is all about. Are we going to be able to tell them anything? We'll know tomorrow morning.
History Hit is an award-winning streaming platform built by history fans for history fans. Enjoy our rich library of documentaries covering key events and locations of the medieval period. History Hit's medieval offering features leading historians such as Dan Jones, Eleanor Janega and Kat Jarman. Not only that, but we've a rich library of audio documentaries covering every period of history through our network of podcasts. Sign up now for a free trial, and Chronicle fans get 50% off their first 3 months. Just be sure to use the code Chronicle at checkout.
9 a.m. and there's frantic activity in the incident room. Outside, the locals are gathering to find out what we can tell from the test pits yesterday. Inside, we're still trying to work it out. Last night you could have cut the tension in here with a knife. Paul and Carenza and I were getting really frazzled because we wanted to get everything ready for everyone to be able to dig this morning. Well, this one was like Pollyanna. Oh, don't worry, everything's going to be all right. Well, was he right? Have we got everything sorted out?
Yeah, he was, because we got really frazzled and worked really hard at it, and then we've been hard at it this morning, getting all the data presented on a map that looks respectable and that we can show the villagers.
Did you actually find anything that surprised you?
Yeah, we did actually. We've got no Saxon pottery at all from this end of the village, and it's not until we start heading west through the village that we get a few fragments of Saxon pottery, tiny triangle here showing just a few grams of pottery, tiny little amount there, a bit more here as we head west, and then even further west in this completely different bit of the village, what looks like a different history with a lot of Saxon pottery, especially here at number 20. We've got a huge amount of Saxon pottery, suggesting really that there's a focus of Saxon settlement in this area with a lot of activity down here.
All right, that's sorted out the west end, but what about this big bit here?
Well, that's the problem. We haven't really done anything at this end. We've got no handfuls of material, no pottery, nothing to date this end.
We've got Phil's little L-shaped trench around the church, haven't
Didn't
we?
really produce any finds, and yet we would still think that that was where, you know, there was a Saxon church, probably a Saxon monastery. There ought to be something in that area, so we do have to look at that.
What do you think the strategy should be, John?
Well, I think we've got to build on what we did yesterday. Take this test pitting strategy and apply it to this area. We've got to look at around the old stables, the granary, you know, the space at the back of the incident room. Let's get some trenches in there, you know, get some more local people involved in digging those. Take it forward.
OK, good morning, everybody. Thank you very much for coming back. I'm going to tell you the results of the test pits yesterday, which you all dug, and thank you ever so much.
Again, today, people from the village have turned up to help. They're all keen to know where the oldest parts of the village might be.
What seems to be the focus of Saxon?
So today, we'll explore that area in more detail. The villagers' job's now done. We do the work from this point on. So the test pit at number 20 is widened to become a full trench. But today we'll concentrate more on the area around the church. It's Norman, but dedicated to a nun who lived in the Saxon period. So we're hopeful of finding Saxon material there. So up by the church, we open a test pit here. Here, and another here. And John does some more geophysics in and around the church to see if we can find other targets. Mick's getting more and more excited. It's not just Saxon he wants. He thinks that there was a monastery here. That would mean a settlement 400 years earlier than the present church. Could he be right? Mick, you've closed down this trench.
Yeah, well, it's told us all we needed to know, which is that the church doesn't go on further east.
But that means we've still got this 400-year-old gap between the time the nun died here and the time they put up this church in memory of her.
Yes, but I think looking at it as a gap's probably wrong. I mean, we're pretty sure of what would have happened during that period.
Well, what do you think happened?
Well, what tends to happen is when you get somebody who's turned into a saint, you often have a monastic community with it. And that is unlikely to have survived more than a couple of 100 years because the Scandinavians coming through here.
Well, the old Vikings.
Yeah, the Vikings, and they burn everything down, they destroy everything. If there's ever a nunnery here, it just evaporates. The only things you tend to get left is perhaps the church site. If there's enough locals around and they survive and they carry on being Christian, it gets turned into a parish church, or in some cases it gets turned into a proper medieval priory, but we don't seem to have that here.
But how can we prove all that?
Well, the main problem we've got is there's a church and the churchyard in the middle of the area we'd really like to look at. You know, it's quite likely there's a lot of stuff under here. We're not allowed to do that. So what we can do is come in as close as we can, because the area that was occupied by the monastery is almost certainly bigger than the area occupied by the church and the churchyard.
Understand, yeah.
So the church and the churchyard, I feel like, are a retreat from the likely maximum extent of the monastery.
But we need some targets to look at. Stuart's survey of the earthworks around the church has thrown up some interesting results. Here's the church. There's a medieval moated site just here. But there's also a whole other system of earthworks. This seems to be a roadway from the river heading straight towards the church. There also seems to be a large platform at the top of it, and off to the side is a large lump in the ground, another platform. It looks like it could be a boundary ditch of some sort, so we put a trench just here to see if it is. We also now have some geophysics results for this area here, the orchard field right next to the church. Have you geophysed the whole field?
We've only managed to do a quarter because of all the trees, but look, we've got some really nice results. The high resistance in black is what we're normally interested in, but look at these low resistance rectilinear white responses.
What might that be?
It looks like a building, doesn't it?
Well, it could be robbed out walls. The thing is, they're also aligned with the church.
Ah.
Why do you say What could be so significant about that?
Well, if the present church is on the site of a monastic church, then these could be monastic buildings going with it.
We've got to dig it, haven't we?
Well, we certainly have, yeah.
Well, what I think we should do is actually put a couple of test pits to get the bigger picture if Mick's right.
Yes. And I think we can, at least we'll get an idea of what those are representing before we start bigger.
And any fines associated with them.
I suppose it could just be a load of Victorian bottles.
Yeah.
Well, he'll find out.
Once you've dug your test
Once
pit.
I did.
Phil opens the first of 2 test pits in the orchard. John keeps an eye on things.
I would help you, you know, but...
No, you wouldn't. You've
the
never
first
done
bit
so
of work
before.
you've done today, so...
Hey? When was the last time you did any?
I've been working all morning.
But you don't know what work is, John. All you do is walk up and down like with a supermarket trolley.
Look out for the crocuses.
Back in the village, we've really gone as far as we can in number 20. This was where we found Saxon material. But now, as we go deeper, all we're getting is medieval, and even later.
Probably Victorian.
Clearly, this ground has been turned over, so there's nothing more to be gained by digging here. We close it down. In one of the test pits closer to the church, we've also hit the bottom. And we've got an interesting find here.
What's nice here is we can see 2 distinct phases of archaeology. We've got the later wall, which looks to be 18th century handmade bricks running down the garden, and they're overlying straight on top of this earlier cobbled surface, which contains 15th century and therefore probably dates to that point too.
It's marvellous to see this. I had no idea anything existed like this.
Absolutely.
It's, you know, it's wonderful to see it.
The problem with this, though, again, is that it doesn't really take us any earlier than medieval. So what can the pottery we found tell us?
I've laid some of the finds from the test pits out, sort of in chronological order, give you an idea what's going on. We've got the Romans down there all on their own, then a great big gap here.
This is the black hole of 400 years?
Yeah, this is the early and middle Saxon, say 450 to 850 AD. There's nothing so far. And then we arrive at the late Saxon. Now, when we're saying late Saxon, I suppose what we really mean is Viking age, 850 through into the 10th century. Then we've got this stuff, which is all the Norman period stuff, 11th to 12th century.
So those people who were saying that this is a medieval settlement, we've proved that that's wrong. We've got a lot of Norman stuff.
Yeah, we've got Norman and we've got pre-Norman, so I think from the pottery we've got here, there's very little doubt that there was a settlement here in the Norman times.
The pottery we found proves that there were people living in and around Nether Poppleton right through the medieval period and right back to the 11th century. That part of the village occupied by houses was laid out in the medieval period, but there was already a Norman community living here. So we closed down all the test pits in the village. They've answered that question. The big question, though, was there an earlier settlement still stands. Our only chance now of finding anything earlier lies in what we find close to the church. That monastery that Mick's besotted with is our only hope of pushing this village history back any further. Rackshire thinks she may have something, but is it good enough for Paul?
Ooh, what's going on here, then?
Well...
Oh.
We've got a piece of pottery.
Yeah.
Well, I'm quite excited. I think it's quite early.
Yeah? Oh, dear. Well, it could be. I mean, certainly looking at the geology of it, you've got these big lumps of quartz sticking out of it. It's kind of typical of late Saxon and the Saxo-Norman pottery you get around here. I mean, it could conceivably be even earlier, but it's very battered, and I wouldn't like to sort of really try and give too close a date to it, you know?
Are you being rude about my pottery, though?
No, I mean, it's a nice start, but it would be nice if you get some bigger bits.
I'll try my best, then.
OK.
Cheers.
Cheers.
This trench could be very important. There's a big ditch here, and if it is Saxon, it could help determine whether there was a monastic settlement here at that time. But if there was one, what are we looking for? So what would it have been like, this monastery?
Well, it's difficult to answer that because so few of them have been excavated. You know, so few of them do we know anything about. But the little bits that we do know, I mean, probably the best thing is to try and draw you a sort of sketch of them. A lot of the time, they're on promontories. Very often there's a chunk of land sticking out with marshes around it, or a river next to it, something like that. And they cut off that promontory with a ditch that cuts off the monastic area from the rest. And then, because the most important thing, there's often more than one church, and they're often in line like that, so I've put a couple in there.
Why did they do that?
We don't know, to be honest. I think part of it is just structural. They couldn't put a really big building up. And then, because often monasteries at that date are mixed communities of men and women. Nuns, priests to serve the nuns, and then often with an abbess. We must have been formidable ladies, actually, over the top of everybody. So we need some sort of dormitory area, refectory area, something like that. And let's have some priests with similar accommodation nearby, kitchens, all that sort of stuff going with it. And there's always guests. And those guests, in some cases, will be the aristocratic families and the royal families. So let's put in a big sort of guest hall over here with facilities going with that. And then often they're down by a river and they're bringing supplies in by a river. So in the end, it can start to look like almost like a small town, sort of complexes of buildings. But very, very irregular, and nothing like your Fountains Abbey or your Tintern Abbey that we think of as monasteries later on.
Right next to the church, we've found something a little strange. So we ask an architectural historian to have a look at it.
It's limestone, which is the kind of stone you would use for architectural details on buildings. Problem is, we can't quite see enough of it at the moment to
Yeah,
Just to
definitely.
see what it is. I would guess, judging by the moulding so far, that it's 13th century in origin, but
13th century.
we really need to see a lot more of it. It's a rather strange find, really. One would hope it's from the church to make the story uncomplicated, but if it's from another building, it all gets very interesting indeed.
This will clearly need to be investigated a little further. Over in the orchard, Phil's also got a strange find.
You got anything over there?
Well, I'm down in the deepest bit. I'm down to about 80 centimetres.
Yeah.
I've got two nice bits of early medieval pottery.
Yeah.
And I think I've got a pair of legs down here.
Pair of legs?
I think they're legs.
You sure they're not roots? All I've had is loads and loads of roots and worms and stuff down here.
No, I think they're legs. They seem to have marrow in the middle. I'm sure it's legs.
I'm not down on the natural yet, so I'm going to keep hauling down here, and maybe I'll find a pair of arms or something like that to go with it.
Doesn't look much like just a simple field wall.
And on the other side of the orchard, there are a few bricks sticking out of the ground which Ian has started to explore a bit. And they are intriguing.
It's looking quite substantial, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there's some bricks tumbling off it down this way, but it's going on down. It's pretty solid here.
That makes you wonder whether it is just an orchard wall then.
Well, it could be, but for an orchard, it's a very big wall.
Remember I said to you what a long shot it was to get at that early Saxon period? Well, I think the odds have just shortened on it because of what we found in this ditch.
What you got, Rocha?
Found a larger bit of pottery. Do you know what date that is, Paul?
Oh yeah, that's a bit more like it. I mean, that's pre-Viking, that's Saxon, AD 450 to 850. I mean, that's what we've been looking for, really.
Where did you find it?
Found it more or less at the bottom of this ditch on the side, which is great, which means it's from the early phase of this ditch.
So that means we've got a Saxon ditch?
Well, it looks like it, doesn't it? The pottery is the right date. We've got the ditch coming through here. It's near the bottom. It must be near when it was dug.
But a ditch isn't the most exciting thing in the world, is it?
Well, when it comes to Saxon ditches in the pre-Viking period, yes, there's only three things you tend to get them round. A royal centre, a trading centre or a monastery. So it can only be one of these three things.
And what we're looking for here is a monastery, so it seems to fit.
What do you reckon the significance of that ditch is?
Well, I think it's fantastic. It could be the vallum round the edge of a monastic enclosure.
What's a vallum?
It's a big ditch which defines the religious area from the world outside. Yeah. It's fantastic.
Why do you say that?
Because it's big, it's broad, it's exactly the sort of thing you expect to find, and you can trace it in earthwork form going down there and going back that way, heading back towards the church. So I think it's fantastic.
OK, so we've got one piece of Saxon pottery and a little bit of ditch.
Well, no, because we've got another piece of Saxon pottery. Emma's just found that in her feature down that end of the trench, and Phil's got a piece out of the churchyard as well.
So it's all coming together in the last hour or so, you know, beginning to get the evidence, the boundary around it. It's all starting to come together.
You're quite excited, aren't you?
I think it's fantastic. just what I thought we'd never find.
So tomorrow, could we find Mick's missing monastery?
God, I hope so.
Yesterday evening we found an old ditch and some ancient pottery down there which seemed to be clues as to the location of Mick's missing Anglo-Saxon monastery. But this being Time Team, things are never as easy as they seem, and this morning Stuart's found something entirely different which has set us herring off in a totally different direction. Stuart, after 12 years on Time Team, even I know that is not Saxon archaeology.
Well, that's a phase of Saxon you've never seen before.
What were you doing here?
Well, what we've got here is a series of regular earthworks. There's a regular layout of them which we're interested in. We want to know what they were. And there's a piece of wall exposed. Can you see that there?
Yeah, yeah.
So we put a trench here to see what it was. And look, we've got this really well-built brick wall. It's got what appear to be Tudor bricks in it. And it's just sitting there.
What do you think it might be?
Well, we've actually put another hole in over there.
Yeah.
And we've got lots of building rubble, tile, all the debris from a collapsed building. I think we've probably got here an unknown Tudor building, which I knew absolutely nothing about before.
Really unknown?
Completely. I mean, I've walked over this field more times than I care to remember with dozens of other people, and we've walked past that wall, and the idea of a Tudor mansion just hasn't popped into our minds. And yet, when you look at the aerial photographs, when you listen to Stuart talking about it, it's quite clear that we've got this regular platform surrounded by these intricate earthworks that do seem to indicate a previously unknown Tudor house with this garden around it.
We've only got one day left. What can we do about it?
Well, I think the important thing here is to decide, are we inside a house, are we outside the house? So dig this trench, see if we can identify floor levels or yard levels here, and take the trench back into the orchard over there. Again, see if we've got yard levels or indeed floor levels.
So we've got an Anglo-Saxon monastery and a Tudor mansion and just one day left.
It's big trouble, I think, yes.
Even when you know there's something under the ground, you don't always find it. To have stumbled across a Tudor mansion no one had ever heard of is very rare indeed. This is where the wall is, at the back of the orchard. The building rubble is here. We open another trench here to see if we can find more wall. These are the earthworks, which look like some sort of raised platform. John geophysed this area yesterday, so we re-examine the results to see if this new discovery makes any sense.
I can't actually see a clear building plan here. We've certainly got what might be structure on that side.
Yeah.
There that Ian's digging.
Yeah.
Kerry's wall at that point there, and behind us on the bank.
Yeah.
What I'm not sure is whether this is a terrace, a garden terrace,
yeah,
or whether we're actually in the building and any walls have been stripped away.
Yeah. And I suppose that depends on the plan of it. If it was a series of ranges, then we would be in a garden.
Yeah.
Whereas if it was more of a block, then we'd be in the middle of it here, wouldn't we?
Yeah.
So you're suggesting we need something across here to test that?
The earthworks, according to Stuart, suggest that might be the front of the house. We've got responses that go with those earthworks. I think if we put a trench across, we can establish whether it's a garden terrace or the front.
OK. So you've pegged it out and we go have a look at that?
Yeah.
Let's have a look at that first and see where we go from there, eh?
We also look at other things in a different light. It turns out that this column we found yesterday also has Tudor bricks in it, so it could have been part of the foundations of the Tudor house. And in this garden, just behind where the wall was found, there are lots of little lumps and bumps that, with our new view of what might be happening, could be leftover walls. So our architectural historian is helping us to plot them out.
So we should map them so we can see how they relate to the earthworks.
Yeah, if you look up towards the north there, can you see there's that slope in the ground?
Oh yeah, there's a drop off down there. Yeah.
And then it runs straight towards us.
Okay.
Where we're stood, in fact, and then it returns at that point.
There's a corner just there, that way, doesn't it?
That's right.
Once we put the information on a map, it may show us the outline of the Tudor building.
Okay, so just walk straight to you.
Yeah. I'll walk up to the next corner.
Okay, I've got that. Okay. I've got that. So if I plot that up on the computer, see how it relates to the earthworks and everything else.
While the hunt for the Tudor building continues, we're also looking for evidence of a monastic settlement around the church. We still want to find it. Stuart thinks he has an idea of where it could have been.
See down below us where the trench is?
Yeah.
That's cut across a line of a ditch which goes straight up there and leads straight towards the churchyard.
So it's going beyond the churchyard wall down there?
Well, I would suspect so. You can't see any trace of it in the churchyard.
No.
But it actually comes along from there, down below us, heads towards that pylon there in the distance. But it does a right angle across the field there.
You see where that greener grass is across there?
It's just a bit beyond that. There's actually quite a dip when you get down there.
Right.
And then on the aerial photograph and in the earthworks, you can actually see a ditch heading down towards the river. See where the low ground is, down there?
Yeah.
Well, that's where there's a series of fish ponds now, probably to do with the manor house.
See the bottom of the slope in front of us?
It is, but what that dip is and why they've used it as fish ponds is because it's an old river channel coming through there.
Ah, right.
So that might be the sort of former edge of the river in the Saxon period. So I think what this monastic enclosure is doing is it's coming along here, doing a right angle, heading down to the river.
Yeah.
Potentially where it is over that side, obviously the church is there, which you'd expect.
You'd expect that to be in it, wouldn't you? Yeah, yeah.
And to me, it looks as if the other edge of it is going to be where the village is separated from.
So
from
where
here.
the big hedges and the big trees is where it's getting back towards the river again.
That's right. I mean, it's almost like the field that we're in.
Yeah.
Apart from a small bit at that far
Yeah.
end, is the
Yeah.
monastic enclosure. It gives you that that sense of isolation that I know you like with monasteries.
Well, that's right. Yeah, it's almost on a promontory sticking eastwards, isn't it?
It is.
Yeah, that's absolutely ideal.
This is the area described by Stuart. It's the edge of the monastic enclosure, with the church inside it and the edge of the village forming one side to it. It's a huge site, but entirely what one might expect. Mick's happy with it. Back on the ground, Phil has removed the legs, they were from a dog, and he's got some more good news for Mick. Phil, that is not a 1x1 test pit.
No, it's a 2x2 test pit, actually.
It started out as a 1x1.
Exactly.
So why did you extend it?
Because of what we found in here. I mean, look, we've got this feature, what looks like possibly a shallow pit. And it's not merely the fact that we got a pit down there, it's what we got out of it.
Is that Saxon?
Yeah, it's this 450 to 850 Middle Saxon stuff.
So does that mean that this feature, whatever it is Saxon?
It could be. You've got to be a little bit careful because we've also had early medieval pottery from there as well. But the thing that we have not had is late pottery or any post-medieval pottery. So, in other words, I'm fairly convinced that that feature has got to be early medieval at the latest.
Mick, have we any idea what that is?
Well, I don't think we have at this stage, and this is one reason for extending the trench, isn't
Exactly.
it? But
Exactly.
it is the sort of thing you expect on these sort of Saxon sites, where they've put timbers in the floor or posts or something like that. And look how close to the church we are.
Yeah, yeah.
We're right in the area you would expect activity at that time.
So what are you going to do with this now?
We'll just take it on down, try and find out what this feature is to enlarge the trench.
We've got a lot to do today, haven't we?
We have, yeah, but this is coming on. We might even have a go at this one later on as well. It's got the same sort of thing in the bottom of it.
The hunt for the Tudor house is going well. Kerry is cleaning up the main part of the wall. Some locals are helping expose more of it, while we're beginning to think that the material in this trench is to the front of the house. And Henry's now pulling together the bigger picture from the lumps and bumps he plotted. So what would it have looked like?
Well, judging by the fragments that we've turned up so far, we would have had a range at the back which would have contained the hall, some ranges coming off either side, which might have contained chambers and such like, an entrance into that courtyard, and then an outer courtyard where all the service buildings would have been, and including, perhaps, this building, the barn.
So we are looking at a complex of buildings.
Oh, yes, quite an extensive site, yes.
Everyone's saying we didn't even know there was a Tudor building there before. Is that right?
Well, bizarrely, yes, it is. The only references we have are sort of rumours, if you like, in Victorian histories. You see here, there's a reference here to the manor house. Now, that's the current manor house that's still standing. And it says here that that was built out of the remains of the ancient seat of the Huttons, the old house. That's the reference to an older house that was used to build the existing one. But we had nothing more definite than that about it before now.
As we uncover more of the walls, we begin to get a clearer picture of this Tudor house. The evidence points to it being very big. The front wall runs from here to here. The earthworks in the orchard suggest that it extended right back to here. And the thickness of the walls suggests that it was a couple of stories high. It was a prestigious place. Stuart took me on a tour of the front of it. If I'm a visitor to the Tudor house, why am I coming up this way rather than from the road?
Well, this is where the privileged visitors would arrive, the high-status visitors. You wouldn't want to come in past all the peasants, basically.
So what can I see over here?
You'd see ornamental ponds, little waterscape just out there you can walk round.
And over there?
In this enclosure here, you'd have trees, ornamental orchard-type trees, and they'd be screening what was the old moat. By the time you got to this point here, what you'd see in front of you is this grand facade of this new Tudor house.
So presumably that's the whole point of the grand walk-up.
It is. It's showing off. It's showing off to you as a visitor. This is its display side over here.
And if you look out from the house...
Well, what you've got looking this way is an open landscape.
It's a hell of a view, isn't it?
It is. It's private and it's privileged. You can't see the village, you can't see the peasants. You've got ponds, river, open landscape, orchards, ornamental gardens. Very show-off, very Tudor.
And this is what this enormous complex would have looked like. This was an impressive building dominating the landscape, with its own entrance to the church and to the river. Out in Phil's trench, he's now reached the bottom of this feature. The Saxon pottery he found came from the other side of the trench. But what does this side tell us?
So what do you reckon? What have we got out of this now?
Well, not quite what we expected, Mick.
Right.
You remember on the geophysics, there was that white line, which we thought was going to be a beam slot, a building, that sort of thing. Well, there's no way that this is a building. This is a massive ditch. It's going to come out, what, at least that size.
Well, I was going to say, because you've only got one half, haven't you? The other half going to be over here somewhere.
And have you got any dating for that ditch?
Yep, we've had pottery from about the Norman Conquest right through to about the 14th century. It's within those sort of 300 or 400 years.
Yeah.
And I think that what we're looking at is activity here in the early medieval period at the same period as that church starts to be built.
So what do you think we have got here?
I think it's probably something to do with, well, the Norman period, you know. The church is all of that sort of date and later. We'd expect some sort of manor house to go with it, probably somewhere in this area, if not down on the moated mound. And this is one of the land divisions associated with that.
The main thing is, I think, that we've actually got people living round here, which of course you don't have now.
Up on the top of the hill here.
If you look at it now, there's just one house here. There's no village at all. In those days, this would have been thriving.
But what of Mick's missing monastery here at the east end of the village around the church? Do we have any evidence for that? Well, we do.
Why they've used it as fish ponds is because it's an old river channel coming through there.
The Saxon ditch we found is most likely, in this instance, to have been from a monastic settlement. The church seems to have been built on the site of a former church or monastery. Its dedication to a saint who died 400 years earlier is an important clue. And the topography on a promontory is similar to that of many other monastic sites.
Privy shape, really.
So now we just have to explain all of this to the people of Poppleton. What can we tell them after 3 days of exploring? Mick, can I borrow you a minute?
Yeah.
So we've got Anglo-Saxon here, Anglo-Saxon here.
Yeah, we must have some sort of hamlet here.
Well, to begin with, they were right. Their village is older than it looks. This pottery shows us that there was occupation here in Norman times and in Saxon times. In the Saxon period, there was an enormous enclosure surrounding a monastic settlement. It would have had a church as the centrepiece, houses, and a few workshops. The promontory it's situated on is perfect. Easy access to York and a bit of height to give it some security. In Norman times, the present church was built, and a settlement grew up around it. And then, 300 or 400 years later, an enormous Tudor mansion dominates this part of the landscape. This is something no one had expected to find. Like so many other places, it's a story of 1,000 years of history on the doorstep. So for the people of Nether Poppleton, is their job now done? Well, no. A huge Tudor mansion was a bit of a surprise. The good news is that because of what we've discovered, you're going to be really busy for years to come. Thanks for having us.